All right. Good Memorial Day weekend for everybody. Good to see you again. So, we're going to look today at the September outlook and what's coming up here. This is going to be a really interesting and pivotal month. First off, we've got Uranus going retrograde right on the 5th, which is really significant because I've been mentioning Uranus going retrograde for a long time, and the last few weeks at least. And the reason why is it's going to sweep back over the Pleiades. And again, for anybody who's not familiar, you can see on this diagram, the Pleiades is a star cluster way up at the far right of this diagram. And what's significant about that is every time Uranus goes over this, the world goes through huge changes. Again, I've mentioned this before, but I'll do it again for anybody who's not familiar. The last time Uranus went over this area was in World War II. The time before that was the Civil War. The time before that, of course, was the Revolutionary War. And if we leapfrog back into Europe, there was all kinds of dissension. This happens about every 84 to 86 years. And why is this important? Well, when Uranus retrogrades, things tend to go into retrace mode, rethink mode. So this is a time of a lot of reevaluations. And if we look at the political news right now, we just heard, China and India and a number of other nations and Russia are all kind of banding together. I just heard a report, I think it was this morning, how Xi was meeting with, again, the Indian prime minister, or they had some kind of a deal going on with Russia. So we're seeing the BRICS nations, again, in the international scenes, polarize. And of course, there's a lot of tension with this whole settling of the Ukraine-Russian war. And this could rear its head and bring this. I think it ultimately will settle in peace. I don't think it's going to happen right away. And it could resolve. We have another thing that's coming up that's very, very strong in the month of September, and that is this eclipse. First off, we have an eclipse on the 7th, right, which is the full moon eclipse. But the much, much stronger energy is coming up on the new moon. And the reason why, the new moon happens the day before the fall equinox. And the equinoxes are always exceedingly powerful. So are the solstices, right? And of course, what is the equinox? The equinox is when the days and the nights become even. It's when the Earth crosses the ecliptical path of the orbit around the sun. So then, of course, the sun appears to go south after that. And of course, we have winter in the north. Now, if you live in the southern hemisphere, which a lot of people I know do, it's going to be the opposite. They're heading towards their summer. We're heading towards our winter. So very powerful, energetic times. Well, here's what's significant about this fall equinox is not only do we have the eclipse the day before, but most importantly, we have a Sun-Saturn opposition. Those are my least favorite. Sun-Saturn opposition is an aspect of perfect hatred. So, and the fact that that's happening the day before the equinox, and it's happening on an eclipse, that is a new moon eclipse. So we have a new moon, Sun-Saturn opposition, plus we have the moon opposing Saturn as well. So this is very, very powerful, this fall equinox. And we're likely to see a lot of polarization on events that have been brewing, which could mean this whole situation with Russia, Ukraine, and where the BRICS nations and the United States are sitting. And again, we just heard a federal judge had just ruled that Trump now can't make the tariffs. And of course, that'll go right to the Supreme Court. And I don't think that'll be upheld. I think the Supreme Court will probably allow that to happen. But Congress is, again, also looking at implementing these things. So there's a lot of political things on the horizon and world events that I think this fall equinox is going to be a real game changer. It's going to be extremely powerful coming up here. So again, quite powerful to have a Sun-Saturn opposition happening right the day before the equinox on a new moon eclipse. So this is a big, big deal. And I also have to say, this is kind of fitting because if we take it up to 100,000 feet and we look down at what's going on in the world right now, the big energies are the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which doesn't happen until February, but it's happening. And again, Uranus going retrograde back over the Pleiades. This is stirring the pot here a lot on the world stage. So we're going to see what happens here. And I get it's going to work out. It's not going to be World War III, but I get there's more trouble, and resolutions are going to probably have to really be, put on the table here, because it's going to get intense, which is maybe a good thing to bring things to closure and turn things around. The other big thing too is Trump is going to sign a voter ID requirement and paper ballot, ending the mail-in ballots. And this is huge for Europe too, because I think this is spilling over into a lot of what Europe might adapt on this. And, this is kind of full circle to what I've been saying. We've had a kind of a, if you will, a war between the New One World Order globalists and the nationalists. And for the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen a really powerful force with the nationalists in the New One World Order trying to establish the foothold. In fact, I mentioned my opinion was with this Pluto return on the United States, we were literally seeing an attempt at disarray and communism. And I had mentioned many times the Cloward Plivin, and again, I'll put that on the screen here. What's the 3 things that they had advocated? Overwhelm the government with bureaucracy, amass unpayable debt, and unfettered mass immigration. Does that sound familiar? And, we're seeing a backlash to this right now. The, again, push to get the law enforcement back in, the push with ICE, everything else. And of course, the pushback, like I said, the empire will strike back, and they're working on it quite heavily. So this will never, ever stop. But I think we're going to see some very powerful things happen here on this fall equinox as a result of this. I think you're going to see a lot of game changes coming in here, and it may be intense, but I think it'll ultimately be positive. And so, yeah, that's, some of the energies I see coming up. This eclipse too, this series that's coming in on the 7th, which is literally in just a week away, right? Because we're in the final day here of August, and we begin September tomorrow on Labor Day. So the interesting thing about this is that this eclipse coming up on the 7th is all about disclosure, secrets coming out, all this kind of stuff. So this is likely to bring more things on the United States stage, at least with respect to what's happening behind the scenes. And I think, and I've been mentioning this, and it's been all over the internet and the news, you're going to see indictments with this whole Russiagate thing. And I think a lot of other things are going to come spilling out because, again, I mentioned in the United States, we've never had a kind of a cohesive collective banding together of the DOJ, the, again, FBI, CIA, and DNI. And it's all there right now. And I would say you're going to see indictments that are going to be pretty jaw-dropping. And this is what I said back at the spring equinox. Remember, spring equinox, fall equinox are 6 months apart, and they're very powerful, significant energies. And again, that's the Passover to the high holidays on the fall equinox, and of course, in the Hebrew religion. And that's very ancient too, I might say. And it has a significant impact on the world. And of course, everybody's concerned about finances too. I think the Fed will likely lower rates. That's what I think we're also going to see this month too with these eclipses. A lot of stuff's going to come rolling out here. And I would think these indictments as well. So, that's going to be a really, really big thing, I think, coming up. We also have a number of things here happening. Of course, that Sun-Saturn opposition on this new moon eclipse coming up, I think is going to be the trigger point right before the, again, fall equinox, which the fall equinox this year is actually on September 22nd. It's not on the 21st. So you see how the Gregorian calendar dates often don't match up perfectly. And again, equinoctial points and solstice points are so powerful because that's, again, when the seasons shift. And I don't know about where everybody else is, but we've had some real heat here in California. It's been pretty warm. So, and of course, that's usually the case here in August. It's when the sun makes its final sojourn in the tropical sign of Leo. And you can see it. You can actually feel everything comes to the peak. You can see the bugs and the animals. Everything is just really peak. And of course, that's the harvest season, right? So, and then we get into the fall equinox. That's when the harvest is actually brought in. So it's a very, very powerful time. And again, that gets into the law of 7. There's actually 7 52-day periods throughout the year, which starts at the spring equinox and completes at the following spring equinox. There's 7 52-day periods, which parallel the days of the week. Sun is Sunday, moon is Monday, Mars is Tuesday, Mercury's Wednesday, Jupiter's Thursday, and of course, Saturn is, or I should say, Venus is Friday, and Saturn is Saturday. That's the 7 periods. And those also work out with the seasons beginning 52 days of the sun, 52 days of the moon. See, the farmers plant the seeds for the first 52 days. The next 52 days, you could say spring rains, or the creation nurtures those seeds. Mars is the heat of the summer, which is what we're just completing. And then we move into the Mercury season. And this kind of parallels the ingresses of the sun through the signs as well. So really, really powerful stuff. So, and that's where we're at right now. So a lot of comments here coming through. And somebody says CIA stands for Catholic in Action in the Vatican, basically. Might not be wrong about that. But anyways, yeah, there's a lot of stories about that place, isn't there? A lot of interesting control mechanisms there. But this is, September is going to be a powerful month of change based on these eclipses and the Sun-Saturn opposition. And the biggest one is Uranus going retrograde backwards. I think we're going to see a lot of things come up to surface on the international stage. And financially, let's hope it brings a positive shift. It just might. Traditionally, many financiers have always said we have a big shift always coming from the fall equinox forward. So a lot of people are concerned about finances. Well, if the Fed lowers interest rates, which I think they will, based on everything I can see, that's going to be a huge effect, not only on businesses, but the real estate market's going to cut loose. So everybody will be really out there buying because they can get money cheaper. And that has a trickle-down effect in every area of life. Loans are cheaper, and a lot of it's a real stimulus. So anyways, I'm looking at some of the comments here. And one of the things that people are saying here is, it says Holland and Holdemeister, German and Scottish. Yeah, I don't know what they're saying here, but I saw a couple of comments here back a minute ago that were really good here. So they're saying, I'm hearing there will be a one party in the USA to create a union of Greenland, Canada, Mexico under the USA single party state. I have heard that too. That was a good comment because, again, I've actually heard this rumblings for a while, and I cast a chart on that. I think it was about probably 6 months to 8 months ago. And I ultimately think that's what's going to happen. They're going to try and make a North American type of union. And it's all about the money. We are seeing unprecedented changes. There's no question about that. Another rumor too I want to address, and I've been, hearing this is, it's been all over the internet. Everybody says, well, Trump's, sick. He's not available. Of course, then he pops up at a golf course and he's running around with his grandkids, and everybody says, well, I guess that was wrong, right? And, so I took a little bit of look at Donald Trump's chart. And, I mentioned I was going to do this, and I'll spend just a second doing that. He's actually got some really good stuff coming up between now and next year. He's got Jupiter conjuncting his Saturn, which is always practical expansion and completion of practical things. That only happens once every 12 years. So that all is going to happen 3 times. He's also got Venus being trined by Saturn. And one of the most, I think, interesting things that I did was look at the Kala Chakra Dosha on Trump. Now, whether you like Trump or hate Trump, this is interesting because he seems to be doing quite well up until about 2027 when he goes into a quantum jump. Now, you might say, what does that mean? Well, that's the serpent of time. You see, there's a direct zodiac and a reverse zodiac. I could put it on the screen. I don't know if I have it here right now. I'll see if I can fish it out of here. But what it is really powerful. I think I have it here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. But the 𝐾𝐨𝐵𝐿 dosha, let's see what that is. Yeah, it's a little hard to understand this, but where these grayed out areas are, they actually are reverse time cycles. And that's only one diagram. And the other one is the figure 8. And it's actually a reverse time zone and a direct time zone. And that's where the serpent of time comes from. It leaps from direct, you could say, ascensions in the doshas to indirect ascensions. Well, Donald Trump has what we call quantum leap. Some people call it a horse step or a lion's leap. It's actually more of a lion's leap, where it jumps back like 5 to 6 signs in the doshas. And for anybody not familiar with what I'm talking about, this is based on the lunar mansion zodiac. It's one of the oldest types of Vedic astrology. Very little understood. And I myself have to say, I'm constantly studying this. I think it's a fascinating journey of the soul through time. And I have found the accuracy in my own life and in other clients. It's pretty amazing. And it's a complex one to understand. But Trump has a quantum jump, or you could say a lion's leap, coming up right in June of 2027. So expect a lot of changes there. That carries him all the way up, interestingly enough, until the election in 2028. But right now, I'd have to say, yeah, they're going to try and kill him. I don't think they'll ever stop. But I would tend to say, based on the transits that I'm looking at, looks like he's going to keep moving forward. He's going to have a lot of resistance, as he always does, but powerful stuff. And I think this voter ID and paper ballots is something that's absolutely crucial. And I think if that happens, we might actually end up with a country with fair elections. And again, a lot of people I talk to, if I mention Donald Trump, I get stares and glares. I mean, these people do not like him. It's amazing how effective the propaganda media has been. It's been absolutely intense. And again, this is the Pluto return on the United States and the Neptune square Mars. It's been a psyops on society. And this is, again, a lot of very interesting energies that have been playing out over this last 4 or 5 years that have been pretty amazing. And I think the Pluto return on the United States has actually been a transformation that we're yet to see over the next decade. That's going to be very, very powerful. The real big shift that I see coming up that's dangerous in the future is 2028. That's when we get our next Saturn-Pluto square, and always do I see change on those. And I would say that that's the one that's more concerning at this time. I got a lot more work to do on that. But anyways, a lot of people have, a lot of people have been leaving some nice comments. Thank you for those. But anyways, yeah, I like that one about the possible blending of Canada and Mexico. And right now we're hearing no way, the presidents and prime ministers are all saying never going to happen, right? Well, just follow the money. And this is what's interesting about when you look back at World War II, which I actually had an opportunity to look at that from a financial standpoint in a way that you don't always get to see. I actually had met a guy back here 30 years ago who was he ran a federal vault and had showed me all of these gold-backed bonds that had backed Hitler, the Republic of Germany, and they were issued from the United States Treasury Department. And I know people might say, wow, that sounds crazy, but they were. I couldn't believe it. I had to do a triple take to really take it all in. But they had issued literally hundreds of millions of dollars. Back then, that was a lot of money. in the 1933 to the Republic of Germany, and they did it all through utility bonds, various different other types of bonds in mining and utilities, electrical bonds, etc. One of the big ones was Rinelby Union bonds. And I was shown by this group of bankers that literally we funded Hitler and also Japan. So this is what's eerie that's going on right now. And that is when you look at the BRICS nations, you look at how China has been built up by our doing manufacturing for the United States and other parts of the world, but primarily the United States. And if we look back into the bankers, this is where the money comes from, where the flow comes from. Again, Rothschild said it best, you give me control of the money and I care not who makes the laws. And, you know, when you look at the astrology and you say, well, okay, was there any correlation to this stuff? And my answer has to be yes. I mean, when you looked at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, COVID came out, and I think a lot of stuff is going to start unraveling, which relates to this eclipse. A lot of things are brewing behind the scenes that no one's really getting out to the news. And I think Pam Bondi is going to be bringing a lot of stuff out. And again, that's because the information is there to actually prosecute it, not only on COVID, but on, you know, they're going far back now is, of course, the Hillary election back in 2016. I call her Hillary, not Hillary. So a lot of stuff is going to come out. And I think you're going to see some very powerful things happen this September. And that was my focus today. So, you know, I think this is going to be a very interesting month. And a lot of stuff is going to come out of it. Also, weather, too, is a big concern. You know, of course, we're moving into hurricane season, and these eclipses can stir up a lot of violent weather. And again, we've got two eclipses here, remember, happening. One is on the 7th of September, just a little over a week away, or about a week away, right? And then we have the echo to that, which is on the 21st, which is the day before the fall equinox. So it's a powerful time of change and transformation. So we'll see where it all goes. So somebody's saying, could I do a chart on President Trump to see if he is still alive and healthy? Yeah, and I addressed that. Yeah, of course he is. Again, it just surfaced this morning where he's running around on a golf course with his grandkids playing golf in a, you know. So yeah, and again, I'm not getting on Donald Trump, and I did take a look-see on his chart. There's one other thing I could look at here real quick. I didn't take a real good look at his solar arcs. Another guy I looked at a little bit too was Gavin Newsom. And Newsom is going to have a Saturn return. He's only 57 years old. I think he's like 10 months. Yeah, he's got a birthday coming up. Newsom's got a birthday coming up in this October. So they'll put him at 58. And everybody gets a Saturn return between the ages of 58 and 59. And I'm actually looking at Newsom's chart right now. And when does his Saturn return come up? Well, I'm going to tell you in just a second. Yeah, he gets a Saturn return 3 times next year. That'll start in April of 2026, comes back again in November through January of 2026. Those are always big page turners. I always say life is a 3-act stage play. Act 1 is when we're born, right? We're spanked on the rear end in the delivery room or whatever else they do to us. And then that ends at the ages of 28 to 29. So if anybody has children or anyone's listening who's in that age group, we're all going to get probably up to 3 Saturn returns if we live that long in a lifetime. The first one is 28 to 29. That's the end of Act 1. Then you go into Act 2. That ends between 58 and 59, right? Give or take. That's usually right around there. And then you hit Act 3. And Act 3 continues until you're in your mid-80s. That's usually around 84 to 86. And after that, I call it the reprise and the exit music, right? So, and hopefully, we should be able to live to 150, 200 years old if they weren't poisoning the air, the water, and the food. And I think as, you know, genetics and things get more understood and we start, you know, taking care of ourselves better, we could definitely live to a long time. I always mention my grandmother lived to 102 and ran her business until she was in her mid-90s. And Ella had a grandmother who lived to 112 years old, and was functional. Apparently was on the tractor running on the farm, and said, I'm tired, went to sleep. And now that's a good life. I like that one. I'll go for that, right? So, and again, I always mention things like reflexology. I cannot emphasize enough how much that has helped me. And I've heard reports from so many other people. Reflexology is the science of finding the meridian points in the hands and in the feet, and you get that reflex roller. I'll put that up next podcast. So excellent way to keep your health going. The adrenals are so important. And of course, the spleen and all these other organs. And I've been slowly healing my throat. I had a really bad time here the last few years. And I've been really working the vocal cord area, which on the hands is right there. It's right all on here and in here on the inside. And on the feet, it's where the big toe matches. And again, the reflexology diagrams are so essential to that. And it's really been helping me a lot. So anyways, I want to mention I'm probably not going to do a live this Wednesday. I'm taking a little bit of a vacation, and what I want to do is I'm working on some other things. So much for vacations, right? I'll just be working on other things. But I'm probably not going to do a live then, and most likely I will come back a week from now in next Saturday. So. Or I'm sorry, next Sunday. I always get Saturday and Sunday mixed up, but yeah, next Sunday I'll come back. So anyways, I'm pretty much done with what I had to say. I think this is going to be a powerful transitional time with these eclipses. And again, that lineup with the Sun-Saturn opposition. And those are always very dangerous. I find any contracts that are signed with Sun-Saturn oppositions, boy, they are trouble. They are trouble. I've seen that repeatedly. And anyways, the Sun-Saturn opposition, just so anyone knows, is on the 21st, which is the day before the fall equinox, which is on the 22nd. And of course, calendar dates on that, is one thing. The day of the week, the 21st is actually going to be on a Sunday in September. And of course, the fall equinox falls on a Monday, the 22nd. So powerful stuff. Yeah, someone's saying here, all the world's a stage. It sure is, isn't it? Shakespeare was right. And we're the actors. And it's pretty interesting. This is the world of emotions. I was just hearing a friend of mine, and also a really great therapist, is Peter Crone. And he and I are good friends. Every now and then we meet up on the motorcycles. And one of the things that, I had found here is it's all about mind. And when we look at Vedic astrology, especially, we find, in fact, many of the yogis in India would say that this is the world of emotional engagement. We're all emotional. Our lower conscious minds is the theater, like Shakespeare said, of experience. And I think what's so important is to be in this world, but not of it. In other words, keep the lower conscious mind in check. One of the interesting analogies in the Bhagavad Gita is to control the conscious mind, much like you would a car or a horse. Of course, the Bhagavad Gita was written many, many years ago, thousands of years ago. And they use the horse analogy, where you control the reins of the mind through the common sense or the higher self, you see, which is often referred to in many religions as the conscience, right? Or our inner innate self, because we're all here experiencing, and life can get crazy emotionally. And you look at the crazy stuff that goes on, like the shooter. And we always hear about these horrible events where the shooter or the person who perpetrated something had some angst or some deep emotional problem that he felt or she felt that they had to do something like that. We hear about parents doing crazy stuff to their children as well. Horrible. And it's really, again, back to the law of attraction, and also the law of resonance is what I like to call it, where we got to keep our lower conscious mind in check and have fun with, ourselves in some ways and humor ourselves, and a lot of us are dealing with some very serious things, and it's hard to be humorous about that. But it's always amazing to me how powerful the parents are and the impressions that we all received during our childhood formative years. And this is when the lower conscious mind begins to form. And again, the text that I always refer to is the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿. And it's really an interesting text because it treats the separation of the 5 elements of the soul. You could say the dense layer is always, again, what we're thinking with and interacting with and talking with, right? Which is the lower conscious mind. You take a child, we see it's like a white sheet forming, you see, and they're so impressionable. That's why children are so fun to be with, because they're happy and they're innocent and they're just taking everything in, right? And what's interesting about that is as we get older and older and older, there's so many impressions that our parents have done, our friends have done, relationships have done that can be very damaging. And, I always like Peter's work because he steps outside and looks at that from a different viewpoint. And that's what I always try and do in readings with astrology is look at it from a different viewpoint. Oftentimes the astrology and the transits and progressions and the doshas are really powerful lessons on the soul. I think they all are, actually. And when I look back in retrospect on my own life and I say, my God, this time was so dramatic or crazy or whatever it was, right? You then can see it from a different perspective. And it's really all about that. It's all about different analysis on your perspective or your perception of reality, which is such a key thing. And that was the other cool thing that I have to say that I liked about paralleling psychiatry, psychology, and the spiritual stuff together through Vedic astrology. When we look at these yogas, you get back into what they call karma, right? Is it possible that something we had done before is affecting something now? And the answer seems to be yes. And also we have free will. What we do now may affect what happens later, which is really powerful stuff. And, the religions have leaned really heavy on this stuff. And some of it's really good. And some of it may be a bit dogmatic, but it's very interesting to psychoanalyze ourselves and our reactions to things, because I think this is what really causes so many people to go into violent acts, is that they just keep attracting this negativity. And sometimes that stuff is really, really deep. And I see the yogas in astrology. It always blows my mind at some of these yogas in the charts, how powerful they are. And of course, when you start studying astrology, you always study yourself, right? And I look at so many different things in my own chart, and it's amazing how powerful these energies are. And yet, when you look back years later, you say, wow, I grew from that. And that's the real important thing, is that we grow and understand and change our perspective. And any way we can do that is really a good thing, because that's called healing and growing in consciousness, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And, there's a lot of crazy stuff in this world, and good and evil really does exist. And it's interesting how money does play into that. Money is been used, and I find when I look at mundane world or global astrology, isn't it interesting how these forces of, you could say, undercurrents, where it was through the banking or through the governmental influences and political influences, really line up with the astrology. I mean, it's so accurate, it's creepy. If you can go back and look at these major conjunctions of the outer planets and also cycles that were going on with Kala-Sarpa yogas, etc. You see pandemics, wars, challenges, and you also see times of good and expansion, which is where I kind of think we are right now. Even though Uranus is doing what it's doing, we're seeing a resurgence, whether you like Trump or hate Trump. I can tell you, I think what's going to happen here is all this manufacturing being brought into the United States is going to make a huge difference for this country. And of course, if you believe in open borders, I definitely personally argue with you on that one. But I think making this country sovereign is really important. And the same thing that's happened to Canada. I mean, you look at Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Europe, and they've been flooded. And some of the political things I've heard there, I'm going to be giving a talk. I'll announce that next Sunday on some great people in Australia. We're going to be looking at the Australian chart, and I'm also going to be looking at cycles on that country. So very, very powerful. You know, I also took time looking at the Kala chakra, dosha. And for anybody that doesn't know what that means, Kala means time and chakra means wheel. It's the infinite loop of time down in these lower dimensions, which seems to never end. Even if the universe was destroyed and recreated, and I don't think anything ever stops in creation, at least not in time frames we're familiar with. The Vedas actually talk about 4.3 billion years. Think about that. How many lifetimes could you live in that one, huh? So that's a long, long time. And even the scientists, well, the Earth is about 4 billion years old. Isn't that interesting that the Vedas actually talk about this stuff? So very, very interesting stuff here to contemplate. What is time? Time, I wouldn't call it an illusion, but I would certainly say it is a physical experience. It's a life force experience. And when you look at texts like I've mentioned, the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿, the lower conscious mind is the interface that we're driving through life, so to speak. You see, and our lower conscious mind is like silly putty. It can be shaped. It's like clay. It can be molded and shaped. And again, I go back to that wonderful podcast we did with the autistic child's mother. And, you know, we find these people are psychic and that they have powers that we all have negated because we've been so busy in the linear left brain world learning life, right? Which there's value to that too. But it's a very interesting thing to look at consciousness, our impressions that we react to emotionally. See, again, that's why in Vedic astrology, the moon is considered the emotional perception of reality. I always show that document. Let me see if I can find that here. Again, I put this diagram up all the time because it's an elegant diagram. Again, this first one, you could see this is the big thick dashed line is, if you will, the division between the conscious mind below and the subconscious mind above. And again, the moon, these are hard to see when I can't expand on them, but the moon again is extremely about emotions. And I'm always amazed in Vedic astrology. One of my two favorite kind of premier texts, if anybody's really interested in going down the rabbit hole on Vedic astrology, is these are 2 volumes of Brihat Hora Shastra. These are kind of the classic premier texts in Vedic astrology. And I had that years ago. I think this was first translated back in the 70s. And before that, I don't think you could get it. Yeah, I think the first translation, actually, this particular one was translated in 1994, but I have older ones. So it's really an amazing text because what it's doing is it's taking and looking at all this heady astrology and extrapolating it into what life is like. Well, isn't that interesting? So, and the critics of astrology say, well, astrology is predicting the future. No, it's not. It's showing patterns that the soul might have to experience. I mean, look at the way people are born in this world. Some are born opulently rich. Most are born somewhat in the middle, or some are in abject poverty. Horrible stuff. I mean, and you wonder, why, and again, this is the question asked in religion. Why would God do that, right? Why would God make one rich, one poor, one healthy, one, deformed, etc.? And again, Gandhi said this. He said, if once God created the law of karma and time, can take a break. Let it all happen. That's where free will plays itself out. And this is supported in the 𝐟𝐨𝐫𝐿, and it's also supported in many of these other texts that I've mentioned, like that particular text. I think it was the Menot Yehuda by Rabbi Fateh. All these stories of these disincarnate souls attaching to people and even animals and dwelling in the lower astral worlds and ending up in a place where they were just distraught. Well, think about time. If, these lives in these meat suits, they're all going to end, right? I don't care how how healthy we try and keep ourselves, we will exit the body. Sooner or later, death will come. That's an inevitability. It's not gonna not happen. So, but if consciousness is immortal or eternal, if you will, well, what happens there? Well, this is where when you go up, and it's a little hard to see on this, but it actually says, see, the ruach or Rosh, it's actually called Rosh, is the spirit, and the upper one called the neshama, it's a little hard to see because it keeps popping off, is Saturn. Saturn is the sheath of karma. And isn't this interesting? We talk about Saturn returns. We talk about, Saturn making aspects through the different houses in your chart. It's stunning how accurate it is. I mean, I go back and I look, and, I've been a skeptic of astrology back since the 70s. And I go, you can't make this stuff up. You can just see the cycles where we are based on where Saturn alone is. So absolutely stunning. And you look at even like mentioning Donald Trump. People were mentioning Donald Trump before. He has a yoga for wealth that is so strong. Now, it might be in the 12th house, but it's Saturn and Venus. And what's interesting is his Kala Chakra dosha, he has been in a major period that would have really accelerated and that started, believe it or not, in 2017, right at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017. Now, he had a hard time in there, but he has a huge, huge shift here coming up in 2027 that's likely to really shift the way the world sees him. And it's actually quite good. So very, very powerful. Donald Trump was born during a Kalasarpa yoga, and he has a Raj Yoga Mars. And this is a really powerful time for him. And again, whether you love him or hate him, he's going to leave a legacy that I think is going to be unprecedented. And the skeptics are saying, well, he decorated the office with gold and he's building a $200 million. He actually paid for it all himself. I was stunned. I was reading that. I went, wait a minute. Trump paid for all the gold in the White House himself. He's not even taking a salary. But, go turn on MSNBC or whatever they call it now. They changed the name to make it get a better name. And, the rest of the mind control systems, and they'll tell you how horrible he is. And I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. He, paid for all the gold himself. So, and his chart shows that he would have a very controversial life. But I maintain, I hear he's not a bad guy. I've never met him, but the chart shows he's probably okay. He's a really good soul is what I would get. Now I'll get hate mail for that one, but it's the way it is. I also will address Gavin Newsom down the line because I've been doing a little deep dive into him, and he's going to have his Saturn return, like I mentioned, coming up. So it's going to be some interesting stuff. So I got to get running here. But again, this was fun to spend a little time with you. And thanks for all the nice comments that I'm getting here. Someone saying, I'm hearing there will be a one-party USA to create the union. Yeah, I already addressed that for Canada, Mexico. Yep. Yeah, that one I saw earlier. And I agree with that. I think eventually that's where it's probably going to go. And it could happen over this next 3-4 years. I really think it might. So a lot of great comments here. And I appreciate everybody joining me. And what I'm going to do here is not be in next Wednesday, but I will be in the following Sunday. So, all right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. And let me see if I can't get my outro here to play. So, yeah, there we go. All right, everyone, take care, and I'll see you the following Sunday.